Do you think that with it being an unknown where these battery sites are going to be located, is there anything that your clients can or should be thinking about when it comes to trying to protect their IP?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think one of the main things which you touched on there originally, Ben, was the idea of, well, I say the idea, the current way that a lot of manufacturers especially protect their innovations in Europe is around this so-called German-centric model where they'll only file patents in Germany. And I think for precisely the reasons you mentioned, where we're seeing this shift in supply chain, where people potentially the manufacturing base is moving to different countries, the idea of actually only protecting Germany could easily leave people behind at that stage, because you're seeing a very big change, not only in the technological side of things, but also on the manufacturing side of things. And I think when people, if they stick with that old model, could really leave themselves exposed, which really brings myself onto another point as well, which I find really fascinating about electric vehicles, is that we're seeing so many new entrants into this market. We are seeing, so for example, Tesla, one of the highest valued companies in the world at the moment, not a traditional automotive manufacturer by any stretch of the imagination, but they brought themselves into this market by having a very different model or a very different approach to what you might call traditional automotive. So what we're seeing is that it's not just the engineering side of innovation, but there's also the software side of the innovation which comes together. And so we're not just seeing a single individual company a lot of the times, but there's a lot of collaboration which comes in, and that collaboration also brings in a lot of new players, a lot of new market entrants, and quite a few of them come in with what you might call a Silicon Valley style attitude, so a bit more aggressive in terms of patent enforcement and their portfolios, and they're looking really to monetize more, quickly than might otherwise be expected. So with that brings its own challenges to existing manufacturers. We've seen a lot of litigation going on in this space where companies, established OEMs are being sued by software companies, which 10 years ago you would have scratched your head at. But now it seems to be quite an accepted thing which is going on. And that's caused a lot of disruption as well for patent portfolio holders and people and entrants into the market as well, because whereas beforehand you might have had a more traditional, more staid model and the idea of only filing in Germany would have worked, I think at the moment, especially in the electric vehicle space, that idea might become quite outdated very quickly, because essentially you're not going to have, where there's two sides of this. One is that you're going to have, you want your patents to be able to protect what you're innovating, and also to prevent your, to stop your competitors if necessary. And if you've only got a very restricted geographical coverage by doing so, you are going to potentially cause yourselves problems down the line there. So I think there's going to be some form of need to change how patent portfolio holders look at Europe in general, moving away from this German-centric model and perhaps considering more of these issues in terms of this change in supply chain, this change in technology, this change in market names and entrants, which are going on there. So it's a really, really interesting time for people in this space, and especially in the EV side of things.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, if you end up in a situation where Sweden, for example, becomes a battery manufacturing powerhouse and your patent protection won't help you there, you're going to be in a situation where you can't prevent anyone's activities in that particular country, in that region. And so companies need to be thinking about how to make their IP portfolio more future-proof, or at least nimble, enable them to decide later on, once the dust has settled a little bit over the next 5 to 10 years, about which countries are going to lead the way in certain technologies. I think it's very useful for companies to introduce a tiering system to their technologies, so they can identify which are the most important technologies that they really need to protect, and which are the most likely countries to lead the way in those technologies, which countries are going to be the most valuable for this company to have protection in. I think when you compare the patenting system to the rate of change with technology, the patent system, one benefit of it being relatively slow is it can take you 3 to 5 years to obtain a granted patent. When you're looking at the European system, if you file that at the European Patent Office, it's not until the case is granted that you actually have to decide where your protection needs to be. So at that point, you can pick and choose based on what's the latest developments in this particular sector. Where do we want to get protection in? Is this a really important innovation that we need to protect in more than one country? And you can pick and choose which jurisdictions you get protection for that in.
Yeah. So you're almost keeping your options open as long as possible.
Yeah, exactly. You're hedging your bets against future changes, and we've seen an awful lot of changes in the industry. I think I heard it said that it's the next 10 years they're expecting to see 100 years worth of change in the automotive industry, and the biggest transformation since Henry Ford, the days of Henry Ford and the Model T production line where it all began.